I think a maker is anyone who is willing to go out and test a hypothesis or explore something to try and understand how the world works. I guess I agree. Maybe all experimental physicists or scientists are makers in some sense, because you get to build tools to solve problems or try to gain insight into something. My name is Michelle Espy. I grew up in La Habra, California, which is about 30 miles east of Los Angeles. I actually had a really good high school physics teacher, and so that was when I started to get interested in physics. I think what initially interested me was the idea that you could figure out what was going to happen in physical systems just based by, laws and understanding of them, and that seemed to me kind of amazing that you could predict what was going to happen. Working at LANL, it's like living in a small town where everyone's a PhD scientist. So that's kind of a really interesting place. And so on any given day, I'm lucky enough to get to face some challenge that wasn't like the day before. And so that's kind of one of the most wonderful things about my job. I'm most enthusiastic about this device's potential because I think it could bring magnetic resonance imaging, which is a wonderful technology, to people that don't have it. So most of the world doesn't live in a place that's wealthy enough or has the infrastructure for MRI to be a regular tool. And so I think that's the most exciting thing to me, is that MRI could become more widely available. The MRI machine that we developed has a long and sort of interesting history. We started on my team working on some techniques for functional brain imaging that actually were not related to MRI. But one of the frustrations of that method is it didn't provide any information about the structure of the brain, which can help constrain what you're learning about the function of the brain. And so we got into the low-field MRI sort of as an adjunct to the method that we were pursuing. Realized that we had in fact developed an MRI machine that would be good for anatomical imaging too, in kind of rugged rural settings where MRI presently isn't available, like the combat support hospital where you can't get an MRI, or a third world country where you can't get an MRI. And so it kind of came in a big circle that way, where we started looking at the brain, then we weren't looking at the brain, then we were back to looking at the brain again. All MRI machines, whether they're high field techniques or the very low field techniques that we use, operate roughly the same way, and that is that your body is filled with water, and that water has protons in it, and those protons can be, their nuclear spin can be aligned in an external magnetic field, which that magnetic alignment can then be manipulated by the application of other magnetic fields to produce a signal that can be measured, and amazingly enough, that signal can even be spatially encoded by the frequency. And so that's how all MRI machines work. Our MRI machine works exactly the same way, but the magnetic fields are low, sometimes the same as the Earth's magnetic field that we're sitting in right now. And the reason that we get away with that is that we do trade off some signal, but we also use methods of maybe applying a bigger magnetic field, but only for a very short period of time, and then putting a lot of effort into the sensors themselves and trying to make them very sensitive. And so through this combination of techniques, we've made an MRI machine that doesn't take as nice a pictures as a high-field MRI machine in a hospital, but can still give you a lot of information, hopefully even diagnostic information, with much, much lower cost and overhead in the magnetic field. Oh, the importance of room to fail. Yeah, it's very important, because I think you don't take any risks if you don't feel like failure is an option. And also, doing hard things, you're going to fail. And so being able to accept that and learn from it instead of being crushed by it is a pretty important thing. And it's interesting in the sciences, because you don't publish what doesn't work. You only publish your papers on what does work, but it's the millions of experiments you tried that failed that gets you there. The importance of young learners being able to explore and be creative. Yeah, I think that's tremendously important, because especially to keep them engaged in the sciences, because I think so much of what science instruction can devolve into is stuff that doesn't feel very creative, right? You have to memorize something, or there's all these rules you have to memorize, and it's hard to get enthusiastic about that. But doing hands-on experimental work, I think typically makes things more real for people, and is a way to bring that stuff home. And so I think it is really important, and it should probably start very early in the classroom, giving people a chance to try stuff out and see stuff fall over or not work and understand why. Well, it's usually more fun to do stuff in a group, which I think is important for young learners, because you don't want to get intimidated by, or overwhelmed by if something's technically difficult, or maybe you don't know at the start how it's going to end. So I think that's always helpful. And then I also think it's good to learn early that there's people who have different ways of approaching problems. So there's diversity of skills and diversity of approaches, and sometimes that kind of sparks creativity in trying to get stuff done. Working with your hands is one of the things that makes us human, right? I mean, that differentiates us from most other animals, is that we make things, we build stuff, we get tools to help us do what we want to do, or we just make things because they look good. And so I think that's just fundamentally important as a human to make stuff. I think it gives people a tremendous amount of self-confidence. I mean, I think there's nothing better than putting something together with your own hands and seeing the fruits of your labor, whatever that is, right? To say, I built that, I made that, I figured that out.